Start the joint special meeting of Zoning Commission, Planning Commission, Housing Task Force. We're going to go around the room, do roll call. We'll start with Joe. We'll go around the room.
Yeah, Joe Rousseau, I'm representing the Saybrook Coastal Resilience Coalition, and I'll be giving this presentation.
Thank you.
I'm Doug McCracken, Planning Commission.
Jay Byers, Planning Commission.
Michael Leonard, Planning Commission.
Jerry Lewis, Zoning Commission.
John Henry, Zoning Commission.
Mike Kelly, Zoning Commission.
Paul K, Planning Commission.
Chris McGrath, just a guest, Chocolate Beach Board of Governors.
Carolyn Lyle, I'm part of the Old Saybrook Coastal Resilience Coalition.
Mark Calderello, Zoning.
Laura Gray, Zoning.
Nick Prevost, Planning.
Chuck Chadwick, Borough of Fenwick.
Chris Costa, Town Planning Officer.
Very good. Thank you all.
Bob Friedman, zoning.
Bob.
Dennis Tulamari, Planning Commission.
Casey.
Casey Hand, zoning.
Catherine.
Kathy Suglin, planning.
Thank you all. All right, now that we have Joe's screen up and running,
Yeah,
I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
All right, sorry for the delay. I
That's
think
fine.
we'll still get through it. I have 4 parts to this presentation called Climate Change, Sea Level Rise, Local Impact. First part is a little bit about the science, which for time I'll skip through pretty quickly. Then talk about local conditions here of climate change. Then we're going to talk about some solutions. And then I'm going to show the last slide. It's about called thresholds and tipping points, what the future looks like and how it will impact us. So I'll jump right in here. So on this slide here, again, just for brevity, I'll move along. This is just the whole evolution of the Earth, and I have a couple of graphs marking prehistorically some of the climate trends that have gone on. I'm just going to point out some points here. The arrows are, we're just zooming in on the period, so I'm telescoping in, getting closer and closer to the present. All I want to point out, in the past, we've had periods of warm and cold, but overall the planet keeps cooling with time. And then if you zoom into this little piece spread out, you can see since the last 66 million years ago, since the end of the dinosaur age, we've been slowly cooling. And we are in a period now that's comparable to the coldest period that was billions of years ago. And you'll see this here. So keep zooming in. This is 5 million years. And you can see we're down into what we call the Ice Age period, which has been lasting about 1 million years, where we've gone up and down out of interglacial and glacial periods. And you can see, this is an important point. We're going to watch the Eemian versus the Holocene. We're in the Holocene interglacial. The last big one was the Eemian, and we're getting close to be what is one of the warmest periods in the last 1 million years. So that's how fast our warming. And you can see now we'll telescope in. This is 120,000 years ago. We had Eemian. The last 20,000 years ago was our low point of the cold for our ice age that we had here. We're in the interglacial now, and it wants to cool. That's the next step, but we're shooting up warming because of greenhouse gases. But the important thing, we're going to come back to this, we're almost getting warm to the level of the Eemian. So in essence, we're going back to see what the weather was like 120,000 years ago. So we'll take a little closer. Again, I'm skimming through because of time, but if you have specific questions, just raise your hand and let me know. Let's look at the greenhouse gases. So as you're all familiar, we have seasons. We already have a climate. It gets winter, and we're in the middle of winter now. It gets summer. So the vegetation comes out north and south, and that's how you see with the carbon, there's the zigzag is the seasons. But you can see the exponential rise. And, you know, it's gone up all the way now. I got the latest numbers, 427 parts per million. And I remember when it passed 400, I remember when it passed 300, that's how old I am, when it was a big deal. But there's more to the story. It's not just carbon dioxide. There's also being released as methane and nitrous oxide. There's both natural and man-made processes that are released in all of these. And the challenge is it took millions of years to put this into the ground, and we're doing it in hundreds of years. We're bringing it all up in 100 years. We're bringing out what took a million years to store. And the other thing to realize is we have the resident time real quick and the what they call potential relative to CO2. So carbon dioxide takes about 1,000-year molecule to circulate through the atmosphere. That's our problem. It stays in the atmosphere once we release it up. Methane takes about 10 years, but it's 30 times as the absorption of carbon dioxide. Nitrous oxide stays up 100 years and it's 273 times. And all your chlorofluorocarbons and hydrochlorofluorocarbons, they're tiny, they stay up about 140 years, but they're 4,750 times the absorption. These are really tiny amounts, but this is the one they banned because of the ozone. That's how dangerous it was. And these particular molecules get high in the atmosphere, so that's why they're very dangerous. They get lifted up. So when you combine them all, we have an index, or the CO2 equivalent, or they just call it the gas index, that shows if it was just carbon dioxide alone, we're actually dealing with all of them, and it's the equivalent of 523 parts per million equivalent to CO2. So that's important. It's a lot of pressure, not just CO2, but all the other gases are working to keep things increasing. So we look at on the atmospheric variables first, the atmosphere. This is the global temperature. It's climbing. This is only going to the early 2020s. I'll show you more update. This is through 22. Notice this is where we are. We're in one of the warmer, but this has been really hammered as the Arctic, and Europe has really broken records. And there, you'll see on the most current data we have, you'll see this trend continues here. So this is some of the more recent data. This is the ARIS-5 data that's from Europe going up to 24. You can see the climbing. This here, it represents 5-year averages since 1850. You see that exponential rise. But this is to put everybody in panic. We broke the record in 2023 at 1.48. 2024 was 1.6. This is the critical line, 1.5. If you pass 1.5, keep consistent, you'll see on the last slide, it just spells irreversible changes. And this is the first year last year we cleared, every month cleared above 1.5. And you say, well, is it continuing? Well, yes. Not only was that the warmest year since 1850, but I got the January data came in was 1.75. So we're seeing now an exponential climb in the warming, and guess what? Here's your hotspots. Here's, you can see up in Europe again getting hit. It's that area up in the northern hemisphere right now. By the way, Alaska actually in January had parts that actually got above freezing during January. So that's how fast the warming is going. This is what you want to watch, is this average annual temperature relative to history, relative to the past.
Joe?
Yeah.
I don't know what you mean about the 1.75 and 1.6 global surface. Can you describe what that
real
means?
quick. Go back. Yeah, you can go back. So what they do, they compare to a couple of references. They either compare to 1850 to 2000, or they take a 100-year comparison. But the idea is you take the average of all the annual data we have records for. Okay, and the reason to pick 1850, that's when instrumentation started.
Okay.
So we actually, and it's weak, there's a lot of noise early on, but they start there and then they just average it. And then every year they subtract from that average. So it's a deviation. So it's the difference from that average.
Okay,
And so you're doing small numbers now, because you're taking an average and just the difference. And what they're watching is, what is that difference? That's what's increasing. You notice, if you take that average, this happens to be 100 years, we had cold periods all below that, couple of warm, cold, warm, and then just steady warm. That's what they're looking for, that trend. Okay, does that make sense? And this is just, the second one was just another showing you this, this went back to 1850. And the shading here is the noise in the data, but as we get closer, since 1980, we have satellites. So it's getting more and more and more accurate. We got the whole globe covered now. And same with sea level rise. We have very accurate data. And that's why it tightens up now. We know these numbers are real. And then the scary thing, again, is passing this 1.5 line. That's the deviation, the difference.
okay.
All right?
Yeah.
Keep moving. So this is another really scary thing that came up. Started in 2023. You can barely see here, but there's a gray line. I couldn't get it to highlight it, but I got the 24 to highlight. This is, to give you an idea, these are references is 1991 to 20 and 1982 to 10. These are all the years over here going scattered. This is a spaghetti diagram, but this is what I want you to catch your eye. 23, we just broke out on sea surface temperature. We just went crazy warm. And it continued for 24, and this is the latest number that I pulled off that was available. It's almost climbing back up again. This is what freaked all the scientists out. All of a sudden, in the last 2 years, there was a huge leap in warming on the sea surface. And I want you to remember, let's cancel that out. I want you to remember, now, everybody don't panic yet.
Just do the,
I'm just shutting it. There we go. All right. I don't know where that arrow came from, but that's me. All right.
that's us.
All right. So they kind of panic. The thing you want to remember, this is absolutely important meteorology. The atmosphere takes on the characteristics of the underlying surface. So how the ocean goes, how the ice goes, how the land goes, that's what drives weather. Atmosphere itself is reactive. It's not proactive to anything else. So keep that in mind. So when that heats up, they start wearing. And so this is the superposition of carbon dioxide, and we're talking ocean now. We're focused on ocean. And you can see here, this is the carbon that's absorbed in the ocean. This is all measured at one location in Hawaii, Mauna Loa. And then you see the acidity going down as you put carbon dioxide. As you know, you're making soda. Carbon dioxide and water is seltzer. I mean, you're making soda. So what we're watching is, does this level off? Is there a maximum amount? Right now, it's still pushing down into the ocean. But globally, is there a maximum? Because once it can't go anymore in the ocean, it stays in the atmosphere. That's what they're watching. But even if it continues to go in the ocean, you've got increased acidity. That's going to be another whole set of problems. So we'll see that in a minute here. So this is a little close-up of the most recent data I could find. Again, same location, Mauna Loa, but you see there's monthly variation, and that's important. We're going to see everywhere. It's not just averages. There's a lot of noise just from seasonality, interaction of all the elements. You always have variation, so they average it, but you can see the trend more acidic all the way to 2023. And that's why, but you still have up and down. You'll see that through all the data. What does the acidity mean? Well, you're having oxygen goes down as being displaced by carbon dioxide, goes up, the pH goes down, and the mixing layers start getting smaller and smaller. So you're not getting the nutrient exchange in the atmosphere, and you're getting more radiance exposure. So that is really bad for marine life. For instance, the acidity destroys the shells. of shellfish, any kind of shellfish that you have, you'll end up dissolving it. They can't survive in this type of environment. And you bleach the corals. There's a bleach picture. This is a healthy one. It gets bleached. And that's what they're seeing in the tropics, where you're getting the heat, the radiation levels in the CO2. And that's something we have to worry about long-term here. Let's look at the ice. That's really the critical thing. Ice is very, very critical to the Earth because it reflects radiation. They have a term called the albedo, the amount of radiation reflected versus what strikes the Earth. And they use a ratio, so it's from 0 to 1. And when you have ice, you're reflecting 0.9. But when the ice is gone, it's like 0.2, 0.15. So everything gets absorbed. That's what we're worried. And here's what's going on. Every year, there's less ice. This is what, the yellow is what's typical. And every year it keeps shrinking. We have less ice covering the Arctic. And we have, and we have less ice in the Antarctic. In fact, we're near record levels this year of minimum ice on the Antarctic. On the west end, the west side is what, the west shelf is what they're all watching, just breaking off pieces and going on. And you can see that that's where the loss is. There's very minimal in the east, but the loss. The yellow is where it's supposed to be or has been historically. And you can see it's just receding back. Remember, Arctic is an ocean, Antarctica is a continent, it's land. So there's a different dynamic going on. And the reason the Arctic speeds up in the north, because you've got mixing under the ice with the ocean, warm water gets in there. Continent's a little different. It's all piled up and it has to, like glaciers, it has to kind of roll off. This is Greenland. This is another critical. Greenland holds quite a bit of ice, as you're aware. And 2012 had a huge event where they lost it. This is the most recent data, 24 is the globe, but you still see a continuation melt days, the number of melt days. It's just getting smaller and smaller. And it has huge implications for us because the Labrador current, the fresh water gets in and mixed with the Gulf Stream. And that mixing brings cold, fresh water mixing with warm salt water, and it slows it down. It forces the salt water to go down. It comes as a surface layer. And you'll see that. We always have a cold spot up in the North Atlantic, north of us, and that affects our weather. So sea level, that's what what do we worry about? So again, 93, we had satellites that really did good measurements starting in 93. And every year they're throwing up another satellite. So we're getting very accurate data now. But we didn't before. We had tide gauges, we had others. And so what you got for sea level, you've got three factors going. Thermal expansion, that you keep heating, the water heats and expands. Very minuscule relative to the other. You have melt. Greenland, glaciers, everything are melting water into the ocean. And then you have the added water that's going from the general melt going on all over the world. So you've got glacier melt, but the general melt, that's what's really contributing here. So I didn't want to get it confused. So thermal, this is mostly meltwater from glaciers from land. And then you got all the Arctic and Antarctic and Greenland are actually close to the ocean. These get put together, you can see the rise continues. This is centimeters, that's 100 millimeters. Keep that in mind in the next picture. There's your 100 millimeters right now from the reference from 1993. Again, they use it because they have good data, satellite from there. We've raised 4.5 inches since 93 to 24. And you can see this is the most latest data. And again, like all the data, there's a lot of other forces at play, so it's not a straight line going up. It's lower for a while, goes up. There's a lot of forces. I circled this for you. This is the East Coast. This is the fastest, one of the fastest rising areas in the world. We are moving the rise here from 93 to this period here was 8 inches as opposed to the global average of 4.5. So it's not just uniform picture of water going up. It depends on the dynamics along different parts of the world, how fast it rises. So we're gonna now, you got the big picture, hopefully a little deep science, we're past that. Now we're gonna focus locally a little bit. So I didn't get a lot of data, there's not a lot of data, but in Long Island Sound, I did find some temperature data from multiple locations. This was pulled together by the Connecticut government, has, I think it's deep or somebody pulled it together. Couple of things keep your eye, and I'll explain the arrow. It's very erratic. You can see the data depending on how they sample. And again, they didn't have any record. Did they do it in April? I don't know. They could have done it all year. So it's pretty sloppy data. But what it shows is the trend going up. And the reason I've marked this, you'll see it on the data. This is from 2010. And if you notice, there's kind of a interaction, but then right after 2010, it starts in synchrony. The lowest part of they measured at the bottom, I'm sorry, the blue's at the bottom, the red's at the top of the water. They measure both the top and bottom. You see more rapid warming in the bottom mixing than at the top. And again, I'm not an oceanographer. I don't understand the dynamic. I'm just telling what the data. There's a warming, but you're gonna see there's an implication on the next slide. We're gonna look at that. This is the tide water. This is actually Bridgeport. You can get individual locations along. So I picked one just for the sake of time. But notice a slow climb, but then after 2010, a jump. Then it's climbing again, but it's all higher than previous, even though they average it together. And then this is, I caught, was really strange, excuse me. Was really strange. This is the cold water species. These are, up here is cold water, this is warm water, the black. And look, at 2010, all of a sudden it was a split. I mean, all of a sudden the cold water started going down and the warm water started going up. So you start in your mind, again, the data is very sparse. We don't have a lot of good data in the Sound, but this is probably the best kept data they sample because it's at a location. They go out periodically. This was from Long Island Sound study. They've been doing it every year, doing a mix. This has huge implications for us, telling us that the cold water is leaving species and we're getting taken over by warm water. And we got warm water coming at low levels. Well, the species are coming in with that lower warmth on the bottom. And we got the rise going slowly. Now, people are going to say, I want to go back because I think this is an important point. I want to show the sea level. The average 50-year, when you go back from 70, is 0.26 feet. And you say, oh, I don't get it. It's rising all this so many inches and everything. And part of the reason is, as you have the water rise, it erodes. It's eroding your coastline and it has more area to spread out. And it's changing the dynamics of inland water and the coastal water. So it's not like we have a glass sitting there and you're just pouring more water and it rises up. It's interacting where water hasn't been before and dissolving things and killing vegetation. And now all of a sudden the habitat's changing. So you got to be careful how you read it. That's still a lot, 0.2. You know, that's 5 inches, and you do the whatever it is, 3 or 4 inches, but it's still, it's more dynamic and you got to think it's more complex. And that's part of the challenge. Okay, moving along. So they just revised the number. They're now saying we are good to 2050 at 1.67 feet. That's the best number today that they're given when they figure all the stuff in. So, you know, again, translating that doesn't mean 1.60 all of a sudden in the Long Island. It just means we got a challenge, and I'll show you that. Real quick, you're all familiar with this. I just wanted to show that when you deal with water rising up, there's a lot of issues. There's storm surge, there's groundwater tables coming up. You've got the land sinking in our area to boot because of the last glacier. You've got tides, you've got waves, you've got sea level rise. It's very complex. Water on the coast is not just a simple picture. So here, this is a fun picture, everybody like, this is when everybody runs up close to see where their house is, when I present this. This is, right now, what typically happens called the high, mean high water. And you can see the blue is what they call the connected with the ocean. So the blue is connected with the ocean, whatever the ocean does. The green is not connected. Those are freshwater isolated. This is, it rises 2 feet. And I use 2 feet because it's inching up towards that, literally. It's probably gonna be 2 feet by 2050 with all the changes going on. This means now all these light colored blue areas are now water. They're always there. This is not periodic. It is water there. And this is very familiar to the group here, where the study is. There's a lot of water that's going to be there. Now, what's really interesting, the next slide, and this was brought up by the people who did it. You know, when you have recent flooding here, when you have a really bad storm and you look at all the communities, how much flooding you have? 2050, that's every day. That's the standing water you can expect in the future, to give you a reference. This is storm water today, when we have flooding. So if you got that puddle on Maple Avenue where Main Street is, or you got there, that's a permanent water body that's gonna be there in 2050. So anytime after a storm, you want to take a survey here and say, what is it gonna look like? That's what your house is gonna be surrounded by, whether you should get a boat or keep your car. Okay? So
Little minutes.
So let's talk real quick solutions. We got 3 right now, we always talk. Retreat, rebuild, or recover. There's pros and cons for every one. Retreat, you eliminate the environmental risk, you're gone. Saves money in the long term, maybe than other options, keep building and protecting and doing everything. And the shoreline gets restored to a natural state, or it gets eroded, but it's back to its natural state. You're gone, man's out of there. Cons, psychological loss of not living on the shoreline. A lot of people won't sleep after that, they move out. Compensation may be less than the whole value being near the coast, moving away. And lack of desirable relocation sites. It's pretty hard just to find another site. I mean, you're competing. And I'll talk about that a little later. That's a major problem. Rebuild reduces flood risk, in most cases lowers insurance, at least on the West Coast they do. Residents can stay on a shoreline location, stay where they are. And in many cases, cheaper than relocating by lifting up your house, depending on your size of your house and how big it is. The cons, you still have a potential for future structural damage. You haven't eliminated that. Access to a home may be a problem. Yeah, you may be up on stilts, but you may have to climb down on your dinghy to get back, to get on land, all right? And subsurface, especially along the Connecticut coast, may not be suitable for rebuilding. We have an issue always with, when you have the sands and the underlying strata, you gotta have the right base to put a support, and some places don't. So there's maybe not an option. Recover. Allows residents to remain on the shoreline, nobody moves. Return shoreline closer to the natural state. It's not going back to the original, but it's closer, it's in the right place. And it is resilient to climate change. Once put in, it has a buffer that no other solution has. The cons, living shoreline could be lost in a storm, especially if you're rushing to put one in, you get a major hurricane, it's gone. That's an investment. Cost for continued maintenance is not one and done. You got to always replant, you may have to re-add sand, there's work. And this is the biggie, as you know, interferes with shoreline access and view. People don't want to do it because, hey, I could just walk to my beach, I can see this. No, you lose some of that when you build it because it's a buffer now to the water. Okay. Last slide. This is the scary one, so buckle up. All right. This was a big study done by a large group. What's going to happen in the future? Where is the world going to be and how is it going to impact us? So the big one is 2035, 2 degrees, and we are on target for that. I showed you the number, remember 1.75? We are on target for 2 degrees by 2035. 2035 is all these things which I'll explain happen all the way to here. And it's the yellow circles. And I'll read them off, you can't see it. West Antarctica, gone, collapsed. Labrador Gyre, subpolar gyre, gone, collapsed. All the ice, the water is melting now. The boreal permafrost thawed. More methane release, more going on there. Barents sea ice lost. Low level coral reefs all dead along the tropics. That's why 2035. If you move up, now slide over, which we're on track for, to 2 to 4, which 2045 is the start of that, and it goes to 2075. Now I'll be pushing up daisies then, but the rest of you guys will probably be here to see this. All right, mountain glaciers lost. Amazon forest dieback. By the way, this has started. There's a drying out here, and the Sahel is going to green up. The Sahel is actually going to be stop being a desert and actually get vegetated again, because we have a permanent change in atmospheric circulation. Irreversible change. Once it kicks over after 2035, we're in a whole new regime. No quasi anymore. We're in a new regime. Remember that 120,000 years ago? That's what we're going back to, what the circulation was then. Okay, then also not pushed here, but another one they're looking at, a permanent desert in the Southwest. A lack of water for 100 years if it dries up, like they're predicting happen. There'll be very little water in the Southwest. We're talking New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, those areas gonna be dry. And then you got the big one. Now, this is the big debate one, is the Atlantic, which affects off the Gulf Stream. They call it the Atlantic Meridional Flow, okay, the Gulf Stream. That's the one that people are debating. I just saw a new paper just came out. Get this, they see it collapsing by 2045 now. They moved it up. They actually moved it to this other side. That is a huge implication for us. If that slows down, all of Northern Europe, England get cold. They rely on that warmth coming up from the ocean. And if it slows down, you get warm, because now the heat is not being transported as fast. It's being stuck right off our coast. Remember that warming underneath? We get warmer faster. Remember, the water temperature is the key. Everything changes all of a sudden. And that's one that they're watching very carefully. And again, I won't for the sake of time, but we can go through the others. But step by step by step, all the ice leaves the earth by 2045. It's gone. We have seasonal ice by 2035. We still have winter ice, and we still have the Antarctica. But by 2045, the Arctic is completely all year round, has no ice. Remember that albedo? Changes everything, speeds up the warming, speeds up everything. So the consensus, I'll stop here and take questions. I know I had to rush because of the time. The consensus is right now that this change is not going to stop. It's irreversible. We've waited too long. We are easily going to pass the 2 degree mark, no matter what we do. If we stop today and did everything, we are not going to get 2. We can prevent 4, slow that down, but 2 is going to happen. So the future generations are going to have to live with this changes, and it's not pretty. I mean, it's a different world. Again, things will be different. There'll be some new winners. You can now maybe, grow wine up in Quebec, but it's going to be changed. So this is my apocalyptic side. I always put at the end. That's why I get the term Dr. Doom. So anyway, I'll stop here and answer any questions for a few minutes.
So Joe, why is it important for zoning, planning, and the commission to know this?
It's
Why?
it's very important because every inch you fill in, every inch you put a wall, you're pushing the water. It has no place to go. It's going to go on somebody else's lawn, and they're going to put a wall. and they're gonna fill in, and it's just gonna keep pushing. And guess what? Now you're hitting more and more homes, unless the whole place starts trying to build a thing, which you're still not gonna win. But that's why it's important. You've gotta let nature do its balance. You gotta let the water flow, and you gotta allow space for it. I don't know if you wanna add anything to that, Carol, but
Well,
that's,
no, that's my concern, is, there's just so many requests for variances and construction and removals within 100 feet of the wetlands.
yes.
And and cutting down trees, all of that, trees
All-
cut up the water.
Trees, vegetation is your biggest friend, trees.
Right.
That's what saves sand, that's what saves everything is trees, because they hold everything together. Every one you take down, and guess what? Trees take up in carbon dioxide, so you're destroying. By the way, salt marshes are the most efficient vegetation ecosystem in the world for absorbing carbon dioxide, even better than forests. It's very efficient. And it's just the nature of the mix of vegetation that's in it. So we're part of the solution here. If we can keep ecosystem, we can keep our salt marshes healthy and doing it. And you know, as Chris knows on the study book, and there's mud flats now. There's dead marshes, which is absurd.
Here in Old Saybrook,
In Old Saybrook,
there
there's
are.
dead
yes,
marshes.
there are, because of what we've allowed.
Because people filled in. I mean,
Yes.
I don't want to pick on Chocolate Beach real quick, but Terrence, you know, there was natural outlets for all your water to the beach, and in the 1920s and 30s, they filled them in and only allowed a couple of paths. And guess what? They starved one marsh where it can't even replenish correctly. And that's what happens. And we have to reverse this. That's why I'm in favor of recovery.
And just to comment on really what Carol said, and I've spoken to many committees, zoning, inland wetlands, and I've asked the question with a lot of these decisions for development is, have you taken into account climate change, what it's gonna look like in 10, 15, 20 years? I don't use your specific dates, and the answer is always no. So that this is not taken into account when decisions are made for, but we're not looking to stop development, but you need to understand what's development.
That's a really,
In 20 years, because I've seen it at Chocolate Beach, I won't say how many years, but 5, 6 decades. The one marsh that has all the water from Route 1 dump into it, and it exits, it's not a cold tidal marsh, it exits to a 24-inch pipe, literally millions of gallons of water. So it's a gulp, it's a gulp cup from 7-Eleven with a pinhole in the bottom. And I know Doug's is presented. So that's always a concern. And I asked the question, or we asked the question on part of the coalition, has these decisions making for changes, adjustments, things bypass, have you taken into account what the science is now showing?
yeah,
And the answer is no.
no, and that's, that's what zoning should be looking at, is 2050. Saying we should zone and plan for that, because that's coming up 35 is 10 years. I mean, that's not far.
Inland wetlands too, because that's the big one
Yes.
that we
All of
spent
it.
a
They
lot
have
of
to-
time on is inland wetlands.
Exactly, they gotta start thinking like that. Real quick, as one of the solutions, when I lived in upstate New York, they set up a tax system that if you used land appropriately, your taxes were low. But if you wanted to take the most fertile farmland and build on it, your taxes were through the roof, because it was farmland. But if you wanted to put in an old pit that, was an old road access or something, your taxes were low, because it was an appropriate use. That's something maybe in Old Saybrook we should look at. The appropriate use of your resources is how much tax you pay. If you're a good steward, you should be paying a lot, because you're contributing to the health of the ecosystems of the community. But if you want to go knock trees down and fill up marshes, you should be taxed through the roof. If you're allowed to do it, you should be taxed through the roof for that.
Dennis has a question.
Sure.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. Excellent presentation. I would just personally want to highlight in our town, in Old Saybrook, as we look at this sea level rise, these water issues, kind of the whole gamut that's been presented, they inordinately affect the land 5, where the vast majority of our population, our housing, our businesses are. And so the question as to why is this important to planning and zoning, what's happening with the planet is the way I look at it is because we need to prepare, as you said, 2035 is right around the corner. We need to prepare the town for how these changes are going to happen. What's going to be done? Where are things going to be going? And so that's just my 2 cents and how it inordinately affects the southern part of town.
Yeah, and follow up against what you're saying, and Carol brings this all the time. Do you think it's a coastal issue? The coast is actually better. It's behind the coast. It's the rest of the town is gonna be the one getting hammered. That's where all the water is gonna be. The coast actually can build up. I mean, we know we have 12-foot barrier, but Main Street's what, 2 feet? 2 feet above sea level?
Low.
It's low. I mean, so Main Street will flood probably before we will even know it on the coast there. So keep in mind, we're all in the same boat, excuse the pun here, but we're all in the same boat for Old Saybrook. Everybody's affected, everybody.
So Joe, were you gonna touch on the coastal resilience coalition?
Yes, real quick,
Sure.
we got a couple minutes. So we have all the beaches working together. And we formed, formally in 2023, we formed a nonprofit corporation called Old Saybrook Coastal Resilience Coalition, Inc. now, I guess. And the idea there is, in fact, I brought some handouts, so it has this in here, by the way. It has the complete description of what we do and what we came up with, but in a nutshell, what we do is through meetings, we've identified, prioritized problems among all the beaches, Chalker Beach being one of the big ones, Benwood Seawall, another one. And then we look at supporting grants, which is why we're represented with Chris on this new proposal, so we have to have some input. And then we go for donors or whatever, looking for resources so we can actually do something. You know, we do a lot of planning and we do a lot of talking, but we got to start doing stuff. And that's why we got together. And it's open to anybody. It's not just for the shoreline. We have, now we have guests we call affiliates that come in, and retired people. We have an operating engineer. Doug's an engineer. He's affiliate with the town. So we have other resources, and actually we're quite proud. We're building up a big expertise base that's building up in there that we can tap. But that's our goal here is, we have the saying in there. We have the same planning, permitting, and performance. That's how we like to say it. We're always at the planning stage, but now we gotta get to the permitting stage, and the real win is the performance. We gotta actually do stuff, and that's what we're all pushing. Hopefully, before we're all gone, we'll get something done, so that's the goal.
And just in Joe's handout, I'd ask everyone to take it, there's a picture of a street in Chalker Beach, I think it's right there.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, let me
understand,
pass it
that is not salt water, that is fresh water from flooding, storm water. That's about.
Yeah, let's pass it
100
around.
feet from the Long Island Sound, that flooding of those homes there is all fresh water.
Yeah, that's a
Mostly
good.
off of Route 1.
Yeah, on the one side is, the back side is all about the coalition. On the front is our plans for living, why we are advocating a living shoreline, what the benefits are, and why we're big on that. That's what we're trying to do. You got enough there? I could pick up one direct.
There's
Enough there. But it's got some cool pictures. The one on the back that Terrence is Chalker Beach.
That's storm water, that is not Long Island Sound. We test it, Chalker Beach tests the water.
So it's not salt water.
It's not, it's very low salinity.
It's fresh water
Fresh water.
waiting to drain out through the tide.
24-inch pipe.
And the reason it says
Oh, yeah.
constellation on
How
it
many do you think? I got
Because we
some.
got
they
a
gave
grant.
the coalition
This
a
is
grant,
from a grant from
You got enough?
Johnson.
You got enough? You want
I can
extra?
make copies.
All right.
which was good use of that, those funds.
So back on the back side, you see Chalker. Swimming.
That was January 2023, 13 months ago.
There you go. Just a little bit.
I do what I've been meaning to mention to Joe. I was looking on my phone because maybe something your group would want to comment on, but there's currently a House Bill 6249 to authorize residents in a flood zone to lay 10,000 yards of landscaping fill a year in their yard and get a tax deduction for the cost of such fill and a grant program for road raising.
Oh, wow.
It's a joke, right?
Oh, no,
No,
sorry.
that was real.
So the Connecticut Association of Zoning Officers, I'm in their executive committee. And so we watch these bills and they're like, here, Chris, this is one, it's in
Oh.
something you might be interested in. So isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah.
Yes, very.
So the threat is real, that's all I'm saying, and as a town, you know, I think you have a little fright, because you guys started thinking of this, what, 2018? Or even-
2014 was our
2014.
first sea level rise report.
Yeah, so it's been almost 11 years, so you've been conscious of it, but time is running out, that's all I can say, to get things done, that's all, that's the end message. All right?
Thank you very much.
Those weather report.
Yeah. The long term. By the way, just in case you're not aware, I am trained in meteorology. I have an undergraduate from St. Louis. I have a master's from McGill, and I have a PhD from Cornell. So I have my whole life have worked on these issues, especially applied climate to problems around the world. I had a company and we worked everything from insurance, animals, diseases, insects, you name it. We covered everything where we modeled what changes in the future, how it would impact different communities. So,
Which is why we are lucky you live here.
Yes,
Which
very.
is why we gotta listen to Joe.
So
Seriously.
is there a place where we can go take a look at this presentation?
yeah, I can pass.
You
it
can,
to
you know what
Brett.
I'll do is I can take the presentation and I can save the videotape and put it on the land use library. So
Oh,
anybody
good.
who wants
Great.
to watch it
That'd be
whenever.
awesome.
That'd be great.
Can you just stop screen sharing so?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I know, just didn't want to let the other folks in.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Thank you very much, sir.
Let's see. I think I'm okay. Stop share. Here we go. Here you go. I'm out.
No, that's fine.
But if anybody wants the presentation, I have a PDF version I can share with you. I can get it for your own. So
So I can
study
probably-
all the details. I just raced through it.
Yeah,
But you sure for some.
no, I think we'll keep you awake.
Oh, that's.
It's a little frightening.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
All right, next presentation is Desegregate Connecticut, work, live, and live, work, live, and ride. That's Pete Harrison.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Christina, nice to see you. Yeah, just want to say, Joe, that was a really fascinating presentation. I really appreciate it. Glad I got to catch some of that. There's actually a lot of crossover with what I'm going to be talking about in terms of how we do think about growth over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So I'm just going to share my screen. And I'm happy to share this presentation with Chris afterwards, too. I mean, some of you, no doubt, were on the walk that we did in Old Saybrook back in April, and I recognize a couple of folks. So it's great to see everybody again. But for folks that might not know me, my name is Pete Harrison, and I'm the Connecticut Director of the Regional Plan Association, which is a tri-state nonprofit planning organization based in New York City, but we've been in Connecticut for 100 years. We oversee the Desegregate CT program, which I previously was running for about 3 or 4 years. And really what I want to go over tonight is an update on this work, live, ride proposal that we've been working on the last 2. This is the 3rd session now, to give you all an update about what it is attempting to do, a little bit about where we are in terms of the legislative session this year, and to really just spark a conversation, really continuing the conversation that we started back in April with the walk audit. And obviously, in the mix of a lot of the conversations that Joe just gave a presentation. So I just did my little spiel. So Desegregate Connecticut, we are a pro-homes coalition of about 80 different neighborhood and nonprofit groups across the state. We believe that better land use laws at the local, regional, and state level will make Connecticut more prosperous, equitable, and sustainable. And to kind of do that, we take this all of the above approach. And that really comes down to three principles. One is build all kinds of homes, publicly owned, privately owned, to own, to rent, pretty much everything except single family homes on large lots, since Connecticut has plenty of those. We want to act at every level of government. It's really a binary oftentimes in planning in Connecticut, but we really think there's a lot more collaboration that can happen between different levels of government. And then finally, we want to connect all related issues. It's obviously these things aren't silos. The housing market impacts services and taxes and businesses and school seats and all those other really important parts about municipal government that we really want to make sure folks are thinking about holistically as well. This is just a little bit of information about RPA and how we work, but you can take a look at that. So I actually don't usually have this slide in the Work, Live, Ride presentation for planning and zoning commissions, but because I got to catch a lot of Joe's presentation, I wanted to put this back in. And the basic thesis that Desegregate CT has been operating under the last few years is the fact that the housing shortage and climate crisis are converging. And we cannot think of trying to solve one without solving the other, and trying to do one impacts the other. And really to reject this sometimes binary that it's an either or. Either you can do affordable housing and you can't care about the environment, or vice versa. We don't accept that premise at all, but we do accept that they are converging and we can't really ignore it. As often as we talk about the stakes of the housing crisis, it's over half of home renters are cost burden, a third of homeowners in Connecticut. We have one of the tightest vacancy markets, highest price increases from decades of underbuilding. As bad as the housing crisis is today in Old Saybrook, Eastern Connecticut, in Connecticut, not to continue the theme tonight of freaking people out, but it hasn't started yet. And what we mean by that is, broadly, as much as the climate change impact is happening in communities like Old Saybrook, it is happening aggressively in other parts of the country. And we're seeing that certainly with significant hurricanes in the southeast, with terrible fires in Southern California, droughts and otherwise. And what that is impacting immediately is the housing market, and specifically the home insurance market. And we've often told legislators, unfortunately I have to keep telling this line, it doesn't really matter if you believe in climate change, it matters if your insurance company does. And belatedly, we are starting to see that they do. And that is going to change the demographics of where people are moving to, where people are living to in this country. And by some estimates, just a few months ago, there was a study done that there's an estimate of about 7 million people will be moving just in the next 10 years because of internal migration, because of climate change, loss of insurance, or other types of cost burden. It's unprecedented, maybe going back to the Great Migration in the early part of the 20th century, but that's happening. It's going to happen whether we want it to or not, and particularly how that impacts Connecticut really, of course, remains to be seen. But in one sense, we really think there's actually a pretty significant opportunity for Connecticut to intake a considerable amount of people in the years ahead if we start planning for it and thinking through it and connecting all these related issues now. Because the alternative is, if we don't plan for it, we don't make the connections between the housing shortage and climate change and our preservation and development, we are going to make the same mistakes we've been making in the 20th century in terms of sprawl development, and make it harder for us to face both of these challenges. So that might have been a little bit of a side turn there, but that's kind of the world that we're operating in terms of the work that we're trying to do at the state level. Despite all of that really intense vision of where things are going, and really logically meaning a significant amount of change in how we operate in Connecticut and at the local level. Our proposal work live ride that we're currently working on the state level is at its base a very incremental step towards building the state capacity in collaboration with local governments to start trying to plan for some of these significant changes. So Work Live Ride is a state level proposal that at its core incentivizes local governments and organizes state agencies to create what we call more transit-oriented communities. And really the goal at this larger 30,000 foot view of climate change and housing crisis is to create a post-sprawl framework for planning our growth around the places in the state and our communities where it makes sense to. And just as importantly, to prevent growth and development in parts of our communities that it doesn't make sense to do that. And we think really targeting around transit first is the best way to do that. It also generally is actually tapping into hundreds of years of infrastructure that we have in other parts of our communities and other parts of the state. So this concept of transit-oriented communities, if you were on the walk audit with us in April, you probably heard this already. It is a slightly different approach than transit-oriented development. TODs, transit-oriented development, is a very common planning tool and the planning toolkit. The state has been doing, at least nominally, a significant amount of focus on transit-oriented development. But the reason we do the communities instead of development is we don't think of it as just one planning playbook amongst everything. We think about it as the entire framework of how we should plan our communities. That means infill density, that means building around existing infrastructure, and it doesn't mean, a parcel rezoning here, an overlay there, or helping one project get done. It's a comprehensive framework. And what I think is pretty cool about transit-oriented community is it's the quintessential New England character. We've been lucky in Connecticut to have industrialized and developed first in some ways around transit, whether it's a canal, a railroad, a river, coastal areas, before the car was dominant, because it meant a lot of our communities are dense and walkable and transit-oriented communities already. We've leveled some of them, we've built around highways around them, we've made some mistakes, but the bones are really there, and particularly in places like Old Saybrook. I know we did a walk also in Clinton and talked about the old streetcar line that went through the entire coastal area. And obviously there's still the Shoreline East and Amtrak. So Old Saybrook is certainly checks that box of historically being a transit-oriented community, which is really why we wanted to do the walk there in April. I'm going to skip over the kind of rhetoric about work, live, ride. It's about accessible jobs and more walkable, mixed use development means more foot traffic for workers and all those good things in the tax base. The live aspect is building more affordable homes, frankly, just building more variety. We're kind of stuck in this binary where it's either really large developments, and I know, Old Saybrook, we saw one, I think it's Old Saybrook Station, I can't remember the name of it, I apologize. There's that example in Old Saybrook, or, smaller single family homes, but there's this missing middle of duplexes and perfect sixes and quads that is really what we're talking about emphasizing in a lot of ways. And that can create more opportunities for affordable homeownership, downsizing, upsizing, whatever. But the idea is to build capital A affordable housing and to meet all those requirements for 830Gs and other pieces. But it's also just to build more housing in general to create more variety of price points for everybody. And then just as importantly, this is about creating safer streets and safer communities. We know getting folks out of cars, less traffic, less pollution, less accidents. Connecticut's under, frankly, an epidemic of cyclists and pedestrians being killed across the state. So we really think reducing the vehicular miles traveled per driver, per household is a pretty tangible accomplishment. We're really not saying you can magically not need a car living in Connecticut. There are a handful of places you could sort of get away with that. We're not saying that. Certainly in Old Saybrook, we're going to need a car. But if we can have one car per household instead of two, or if we can take 80% of our trips in car instead of 100%, that kind of aggressive incremental improvement can really make a difference in terms of, our public health and our personal safety. We do have a significant amount of transit in Connecticut that's often overlooked. About 111 communities out of the 169 have some form of transit. Obviously, Old Saybrook has primarily the rail Shoreline East connection, but there is, of course, some transit district bus service there. And there's a significant ridership. I mean, most states don't have the kind of infrastructure that Connecticut has. And particularly in your neck of the woods, we know Shoreline East has been chipped away by the governor. We've been really advocating pretty significantly to get that service restored, which, moderately successful on. But the bones are there on the public transportation that this is not pie in the sky change of behavior. Obviously, here's where Old Saybrook is, and this map is probably going to be hard to see for folks on watching on the screens, but this is just basically breaking down where there are rail towns or bus towns or transit adjacent towns. It's not particularly urgent, but of course you are a transit town with a train station. So the general gist of how Work, Live, Ride works, there are kind of two elements to it, and at the center of both of them is the State Office of Responsible Growth. This has been around for 20 years. Governor Rell, who recently passed away, started this in 2006 as a means to help communities figure out how to balance aging infrastructure, demand for growth, conservation. When you submit your POCDs, your affordable housing plans into OPM, you're actually submitting it to the Office of Responsible Growth. What we've decided for Work, Live, Ride is that this office is really underutilized, that it can help local communities at the commission level and the planning department level to think through some of this framework around transit-oriented communities and help them create improve existing districts, to think about the maximization of the potential for these districts, to provide technical assistance, to really quarterback the effort that local communities are already doing. At the state level, what we're really excited about is this Office of Responsible Growth is going to lead this interagency council or working group, or however you want to describe it, to get all these different agencies with all these different grants and all these different requirements working together, streamlining everything, making sure one grant is not contradicting another grant, or one requirement is not pausing a development because of another agreement or application. And really what we've learned from a lot of communities, including Old Saybrook, is even where is thoughtful planning happening, oftentimes working the state is still really frustrating. Discretionary grants are hard to get. You really need capacity at full-time planner, full-time development coordinator to apply for these things. So the Office of Responsible Growth is going to be the advocate or quarterback for local communities to navigate the state bureaucracy in a much faster, more efficient way, and frankly, to get prioritization for infrastructure funding if you're doing the type of zoning that we want to see. So it's incentive-based. The town, you at Old Saybrook, and I'll get to some of the options and what it would look like for Old Saybrook, but the town is in the driver's seat for this process. But the Office of Responsible Growth is really helping guide towns and states to work together. So the big key three things that municipalities get by opting into Work, Live, Ride is control. Number one, this is absolutely an opt-in, locally driven process. There is at no point, to be perfectly clear, at no point would Old Saybrook be required to accept zoning that they don't want to accept. And what I mean by that is, say, and you kind of have a special case because you've got that central business shopping district, which I said I'll talk about. But say you just didn't have any type of zoning reform or anything around your train station, and you wanted to start fresh, and you wanted to opt into Work, Live, Ride, but you were concerned about losing local control. At no point are you going to be forced to do something. The way that this generally works is you're going to opt into it. You're going to work with this Office of Responsible Growth about how, where you want the district, how big you think it should be, what the guidelines should be in terms of the regulations. There are some guidelines in place that you have to meet, but outside of that, you have a lot of discretion to figure out what you want to do, where you want to do it. If you don't like something that the state is saying you should be doing, there's an opportunity to appeal or even to just opt out of the program altogether. Classic example I've talked about with other towns is one of the requirements is you can't have excessive parking in the district. Doesn't mean you can't require parking. It just means if you try to require 3 parking spaces per apartment, that's probably excessive. Office of Responsible Growth might say, you know what, really you only need 1.75 parking spaces because of XYZ study. Here are the best practices. If you don't agree with that, you can appeal to the Office of the Commissioner for OPM and make your case, whatever it is. And if you don't like the judgment, you can just say, you know what, we're just not comfortable with this and pull out. So you retain control through this process, but there's best practices and guidelines that you'll be working with. The second thing is the technical assistance, whether it's actually doing the studies to design the district, doing an assessment of what infrastructure, water, sewer, brownfield, whatever you might need in terms of building that. There is help from this Office of Responsible Growth to help the local planning commission, the Inland Wetlands Commission, the planning department to really walk through this process, walk the public through it the same way you adopt any zoning regulation. You'd still go through that process, but have additional technical help to answer the good faith public questions that come up with these processes. And then finally, the big carrot here is that you would be getting priority funding for existing grants, whether it's a DEEP grant, DOH, CHAFA, DCD, any of these grants related to infrastructure that are currently discretionary, they're competitive, you probably have applied over the years and not gotten them. If you opt in to work with RIDE, you're going to be prioritized to get those grants now. And the thinking is, pretty logical that we certainly want to concentrate limited state funds in the types of communities that are growing our state economy and doing it responsibly. So, if town A is a train station and town B is a train station, but town A has opted in, is doing some zoning reform to encourage mixed use development, they're going to get prioritization first for this funding. We think that can be actually pretty significant amount of dollars on a given cycle to really streamline the development and the pre-development side or any types of work that you might need. And this is just, I don't want to get in the weeds too much about it again, because you probably have a hard time seeing the screen. This will be included afterwards, but pretty much revitalization grants, infrastructure grants. There are some existing TOD grants that DOT and this Office of Responsible Growth already sees. So those are pretty low-hanging fruit things to prioritize. How the actual district works. In the statute, it requires the Planning and Zoning Commission to work with the Inland Wetlands Agency in town and really to address the concerns that some of you were talking about after Joe's presentation of where it makes sense to do this, where in your charter you have the barrier between wetlands and development. And rather than try to go around environmental review, we want to be proactive about it and really have the local experts talking about how big this district is, where it makes sense to do so, and start there in terms of the process. The only requirements in the statute, there are no density requirements, there are no acre requirements. The district just has to be a reasonable size. That's subjective, and it could mean a 40-acre district is perfect in one part of the state. It could mean a 250-acre district in another part of the state. You're not trying to have a one-size-fits-all approach here. We're trying to really have that nuance and give this Office of Responsible Growth a lot of case-by-case flexibility to make the best possible district in the best possible part of your community. The other requirements, you can't have excessive parking, as I talked about, excessive height restrictions, FAR requirements, setbacks. Some of the other things that good intentions or bad intentions can tend to make certain parcels actually really hard to develop, particularly those missing middle pieces. You can still have all of those requirements. You can still have parking requirements and height requirements. It just has to be contextual and fact-based and empirically based as much as possible. It's really not an intention to have 10-story buildings in the suburbs, not that that's economical anyway, but generally it's trying to fit into an existing framework and just have that infill density. There are 3 components to work that would allow as-of-right development. And as-of-right development doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. It just means you as a commission would approve what's going to be allowed as of right outside of a special permit beforehand. 91% of Connecticut is already zoned as of right. It's just as of right for single family houses. So that doesn't mean you can build a 500-story single family house in your backyard. There are obviously other regulations that you'd have to meet. The same thing here. But the three things that are as of right, any missing middle type housing, which is duplexes, townhomes, triple deckers, basically anything below 10 units per development would be allowed as of right. Again, depending on the other regulations. Any developments that are over 10 homes per development that have 30% deed restricted. And some of you that are savvy on this might say or realize, oh, that's 830G eligible developments. And you're absolutely right. And the idea here is we think this is a significant carrot for communities that are really concerned about 830G development. Some are not. But generally, a lot of the arguments we hear in communities is we're not against affordable housing. We just don't want it there. And what we're saying is, as part of Work Live Ride, if you do it as of right in the district, developers are going to build it there rather than fight it out for years, for costly legal battles. So we think actually doing an 830G eligible development, which just means it's 30% of units are deed restricted in the district, is really going to be a win-win because you're going to get affordable homes where you want them, and developers are going to want to build them in those parts of town because that's already permitted. And then the final piece is really trying to open up the opportunity for significant deep affordable housing, whether it's public housing, a community land trust, a faith-based, religiously owned or nonprofit organization. It could be, a couple of apartments. It could be a development, whatever it is. If it's owned by a public or nonprofit entity and it's 100% affordable, that could be allowed as of right as well. And this is particularly pertinent in a lot of our village centers because there is an old Catholic school or a rectory parking lot that might be sitting vacant that, potentially is an opportunity for a town to build some affordable housing with a nonprofit developer. So those are the three that are as of right. Everything else in the district would require the normal special permit discretionary policy that, your town already does. So this is just to go over again that this district really doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. It doesn't mean you can't determine what is in it. It just means anything that's as of right, you decide on initially and have the other regulations around it. It doesn't supersede any of your other regulations. So even in the scenario where a development is 20 units and it's 30% affordable and it's as of right, it would still have to meet the public safety requirements, the regulations you have for setbacks and parking or whatever else, where 830G actually in practice now does not require that. This would still require that process. And importantly too, inland wetlands agencies, as they normally do with anything impacting in wetlands, would still have review process for those developments as well. So again, even as of right, it still has those checks and balances to make sure stormwater is being managed and those other incredibly important pieces of the puzzle for development. So that's pretty much how it works. The timeline of this, we introduced this a couple years ago. We were really excited last year. It passed the House with 90 votes and bipartisan. It ran out of time in the Senate. It was a short session, which meant there was less time on the calendar, which unfortunately a lot of other bills also ran into that. But we're already back pretty much the same bill that's vetted. Governor Lamont has said he would sign this. We've got pretty strong support in the Senate, and we're going to go through the House again. We had our public hearing last Monday at the first possible day of public hearings, which I think is a sign of they want to move this quickly and become law. So we're really very encouraged by where we are in this process and feel like this has been vetted really well. There's a lot of buy-in across agencies and the state level. And certainly I think a lot of communities are interested for it. So importantly, and this is totally hypothetical, what could Old Saybrook do with Work Live Ride? Number one is you don't have to do anything. It is an opt-in process. So if Old Saybrook just doesn't want to do this, there's no punishment for not doing it. There's no requirement to do so. The second option is, as we talked about on the walkout at back in April, you do have the B2 and some of the B4 district right by the train station, which is a pretty natural place to think about doing this kind of rezoning. And the weird nuance for you, Old Saybrook specifically, and I think, Chris, we talked about this back in April, the way that bill was written is you can be grandfathered in as a municipality if you want to be, if you have a TOD district before the bill passes. It says TOD district specifically, and obviously Old Saybrook doesn't have that in writing. You have it in spirit. So in my honest opinion, I don't know if Old Saybrook, you wanted to ask to be grandfathered in with your existing B2 or B4 district zoning. I don't know if the Office of Responsible Growth would feel like it could legally do so since it's not a TOD. You could probably still apply for it and possibly still get it. I just, in trying to be totally above board, I don't know the way the bill is written, if that's technically true. An alternative could be you go and just rename the district or something. I'm not suggesting it's going to be more complicated than that, but truthfully, I just don't know if Old Saybrook could be grandfathered in, technically speaking. Although, as we talked about in the walk, you're very much in the spirit of doing this, and I think it'd be pretty easy to do so. So that could be the area where you'd want to opt into Work, Live, Ride, and that would just mean you have prioritization for some funding to do some of the other projects that we talked about back in the walk. One thing that come up, I know it's somewhat of a dream scenario, but getting a pedestrian bridge across a train station instead of having to go up the new Boston Post Road side. Those are the types of projects that are honestly kind of hard to string together different funding streams now, but would be a lot easier with this interagency council through the Office of Responsible Growth. And the other thing that is also new from even last year is this Municipal Redevelopment Authority has officially launched and is up and running. And I'm sure you've had some contact with David Corris, who was on our steering committee, was actually a predecessor in my position. We're very close with him, have been very supportive of MRDA. People have sometimes asked us kind of what's the difference between them. And the way we describe it is MRDA is the tactical, has some capital, can throw out, do some projects. And Office of Responsible Growth is the strategic level of trying to bring all the different agencies together, other funding sources together, and kind of holistically plan. So they are hand in glove working together. We're really excited that MRDA has launched, really excited that Work, Live, Ride has some good legs this session, and just feel like there's going to be a lot more help coming for towns like Old Saybrook to do the work. This was, again, just we had the public hearing. If you're not on our newsletter already, the best way to keep updated, not just on Work, Live, Ride stuff, but generally planning things happening in the state and the country, is to sign up on our weekly newsletter that goes out on Wednesdays. You can sign up on desegregate.ct.org. And that's kind of a good way to keep up on things. So with that, I'm going to stop and stop share. And as I apologize, that probably went through that pretty quickly. I will send this to Chris so she can send this out to folks that are interested in it.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions for Pete? Anybody online? Guess not. Well, very good. Thank you, Pete. Yeah, thank you very much.
Pete.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Good seeing some of you again.
Yes. Moving on to the agenda. Next is discussion.
So I added this to the agenda because it's not often that we meet
Okay.
together. So if there's anything you want to discuss, but you can't discuss any pending applications. Or the planning, I know, but I just figured if there was something anybody wanted to bring up, that we're all here, it's not often, so. It's a deal.
I don't know. Does anyone have anything they want to bring up? I don't know. No? All right.
Okay.
That was easy. Any committee representation or staff reports?
Well, I can do staff report, but I know that, Doug has been working with the planning commission liaison to all of our resiliency projects. And Joe is actually on our interview committee for our new grant. So I don't know if you want to give an overview. I'm happy to give an overview of either foreshore or our new grant.
Yeah, so Monday night is the presentation of the foreshore coastal resiliency draft report. It's at the middle school right here at 6 p.m. for an hour, hour and a half, I think. So I'd encourage people to go to that if possible. And then I'll just tee you up. Been working with Chris and others on the, we get the funding, the National Wildlife Long Island Sound Futures Fund grant, plus a town match, partnered with Westbrook. It's about $500,000. So we're going through the, Chris issued an RFP. We have consultants that been on the project. We're in the process of selecting a consultant, and that's to do a study of the Chalker Beach marsh issues, you know, the tide gate you keep hearing about. You know, so it's gonna move that ball forward with analysis, but it's not gonna be a shovel-ready project, but it's moving the ball. It's very painful. You know, then we're gonna need another grant to do the final design, maybe town money.
Not just Chalker.
Yeah, it's not just Chalker, it's gonna go all the way down there.
Springbrook,
Indian.
Marsh and Westbrook,
All the way to.
Chalker
Indian
Beach
Town.
and the Mud Creek, so pretty much from Chapman to Indian Town. Not just studies, but also looking at roads, so really, I mean, it's a $500,000 plan. Joe, I asked him to be on the interview committee because of his extensive background and also as a representative of our local sea level rise group. But it's a lot of data collection. So this isn't your typical write the plan. This is hydrodynamic modeling and bathymetry and salinity and marsh migration. It's a lot. So it's kind of interesting. It's a hectic time because the foreshore plan, we were gonna have the outreach that was scheduled to be done in the fall. But unfortunately, I'm looking at the closeout date of that. The drop dead date is March 15th. So we have the 3 towns, the outreach, and then some follow-up, and then the new grant that we received, which is great. We got that in December, but they wanted a consultant hired by the middle of January, which unfortunately you just can't pick someone and say, here's $500,000 project to run with it. So, and there's a lot of paperwork that's associated with it. So that's a little bit hectic. I think Doug, who's kind of on both committees, has been, he understands how much time we spent, and I appreciate him and Joe. So.
Yeah, and if you can't make the old Saybrook report out Monday night, that's in Westbrook, I think, Tuesday night, and then Clinton Wednesday night. So it's called Foreshore, 4 towns, but 2 of them are Old Saybrook and Fenwick.
Will it be an identical presentation in Westbrook, or will it be?
Yeah, it'll mostly be identical, but they might focus more, you know, there's project recommendations for each town, but so they might focus a little more on the Westbrook one and then the discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
But the slide deck, which I don't know, when that's available, we'll have the information for all the towns.
So there will be, we're encouraging everybody to go to the middle school in person for Monday, but we will have a hybrid link. Unfortunately, the way that it's gonna work, you're just gonna be able to comment in the chat. So that recording I'll take and I'll save it so that if you want to, we can put it somewhere on the land use website if you want to watch it after. But I think the in-person experience, it's a lot more question and answer, and especially in the middle school, it's a little bit easier to.
Yeah, middle school.
Is that the question about the foreshore and I guess that other grant here? Are those state grants or federal grants, or like, where's the money?
So they're from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Long Island Sound Futures Fund.
So like a private organization? I'm just worried about with all this stuff we hear about the
Well,
funding getting cut and grants getting cut. Are we at risk of that?
we were a little bit
Okay.
concerned. And Dave Kozak, who's been helping with grant writing in the office, We tried to tee up as much as possible before there was an administrative change in office. So we got everything together. We don't have the signed contract, but we're that close.
So when we sign the contract, we'll actually like.
We've
once we
signed the
have money,
contract,
then
we've done
we're-
all of our paperwork and that, so we're just waiting for it. There was one typo, like an identification number, there was a Y missing out of this very long, A, B, C, D, J, Y. So that got corrected yesterday, so they're looking at it, we're moving forward. And we'll go from there. So we're interviewing the consultants. Obviously, we can hire a consultant officially until we have that agreement signed, but knock on wood, it seems that everything's moving as planned. Next year, I think will be a difficult year. For this
Yeah,
type
I'm
of
just like
grant.
worried, we have these grants in order, we done a good job of winning them, but like, we're gonna win it, and there's not ever actually get the money, and then. now we get it.
Evan.
Okay. With that,
Motion to adjourn.
thank you, take it a second. Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No? Any abstain? All right. Thank you very much. Very good.